A seemingly routine courtroom transformed into a silent battleground where law itself was put to the test and justice hung in the balance. It began with a detective's wary glance, followed by the quiet arrival of a mysterious observer. Before anyone could react, gunfire rang out in a judge's private chambers, panic erupted, and a nameless hero leaped into action, seizing the weapon and saving a life. As layers of deception peel away, you'll discover forged arrest warrants, innocents being framed, and a secret unit called Clean to Rot operating off the books. Who will prevail when the very system designed to protect us is weaponized? Dive deep with me into every explosive twist of this courtroom, thriller-the identities, the cover-ups, and the fight to expose the truth. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you won't miss a moment of what happens next, because this story has only just begun. The air inside Courtroom 5 of the Lincoln County Courthouse was so thick you could feel it pressing against your lungs. Judge Eleanor Reed, renowned for her steely composure and precise rulings, sat behind the polished wooden bench, flipping through the morning's case files. Yet her heart wasn't in those documents. It was gripped by a nagging sensation, like thunder rumbling just beyond the walls. Outside in the hallway, veteran officer Samuel Ross stood with his arms crossed, leaning against the cold stone. With 25 years on the force, Rossman's instincts had never steered him wrong. And today they cried out, "Something terrible is about to happen." He inhaled deeply, watching the steady stream of lawyers, jurors, and anxious defendants filing in and yet noticing the newcomer. When the heavy door creaked open, heads turned to a sharply dressed black man in his early 40s. He stepped inside with deliberate calm, wearing a tailored overcoat but carrying no briefcase, no identification, only a small, leather-bound notebook. His gait was measured, each footfall precise, as if he'd rehearsed every step. Sliding into the back row, the stranger produced his notebook and began jotting observations. Dozens of eyes remained fixed on Judge Reed, but hers shifted to him. His gaze was different, cold and analytical, as if he were sizing up the entire room like a predator eyeing prey. Ross tensed, inching forward to narrow the distance. In that moment, pens still in midair, the courtroom froze. Pens halted on pads, the gavel lay silent. Judge Reed lifted her gaze from the pages, narrowing her eyes at the intruder. "Who is he?" she thought, pulse quickening. Her fingers clenched the file in front of her, a futile anchor against the unease swirling in her chest. Murmurs rippled through the spectators. "He's not an attorney. He doesn't belong here." Ross took a cautious step forward, voice low but firm. "Sir, may I see some identification?" His words echoed in the hush, prompting the stranger to look up, unflinching. Seconds stretched into eternity before the man tilted his head and spoke in a calm, resonant tone. "This is a public hearing. I've come simply to observe." And with that, the tension shattered. Mystery, intrigue, and an unspoken threat all swept through the chamber. In that instant, everyone knew a storm had truly descended on Courtroom 5, one that would test the very foundations of justice and truth. Building on the electricity that crackled through that first exchange, the stranger lowered his pen and tucked his notebook beneath his arm. As the young, fumbling defense attorney Kevin Marks rounded the bench, scattering manila folders and legal pads across the polished floor, every eye tracked the paper's frantic dance except for the stranger's. With an almost imperceptible nod, he rose from his seat and glided forward, gathering the documents in swift, confident motions. He handed them back with a calm smile that only deepened Officer Ross's unease. "Sir," Ross's voice cut through the murmur of appreciation, "I need to see some identification." His tone was polite but firm, betraying the warning flicker in his eyes. The stranger paused, turning slowly until his steely gaze met Ross. "This is a public hearing," he replied softly, voice unhurried. "I do not need credentials simply to observe." His words drifted across the room like smoke, unsettling everyone from the bailiff to the clerk at the back. Judge Reed's hand hovered over her gavel as she peered down at the stranger with cool appraisal. She had dealt with rowdy spectators before, but never one who insisted on invisibility. Ross straightened, the leather of his holstered pistol creaking as he shifted stance. "With all due respect, sir," he said, "you must present identification. We have security protocols." The stranger's flicker of a smile hinted at hidden confidence. "I understand procedures," he murmured, "but the Constitution guarantees public access to these proceedings." A single bead of sweat formed at Ross's temple. He was no stranger to constitutional arguments, yet something about this man's obstinate poise, his perfect posture, the way he held himself as if protected by an invisible shield, pressed Ross toward an even more aggressive stance. "You're impeding an active court session," he warned. "If you don't comply, I will have to remove you." Before anyone could react, the stranger's voice dropped to a whisper so quiet that the room strained to hear. "If you remove me, you remove your own credibility." At that, Judge Reed spoke for the first time. Her gavel rose and fell in a single, sharp rap. "Officer Ross," she commanded, "cease this line of questioning." The bay's wood walls seemed to shudder at the authority in her tone. Murmurs swept through the gallery as Reed rose from her seat, adjusting the robes on her shoulders. "This hearing will proceed without further interruption. Any concerns about this gentleman's presence can be addressed off the record." Ross's jaw clenched, but he stepped back, hands sliding away from his belt. The stranger allowed himself a small nod of gratitude, not triumphant, but reserved. The courtroom exhaled collectively, the tension rolling through the benches and across the mahogany floor. Yet beneath that brief reprieve lay something more dangerous than any legal spat, an unspoken promise that this silent watcher had a purpose far beyond mere observation. And as the morning light shifted across the windows, everyone realized that whatever came next would shatter the very foundation of this court's perceived order. Building on the courtroom's sudden hush after the judge's gavel, the heavy doors burst open as Attorney Peter Carson stumbled in, eyes wild with fear. "Your Honor, I need to speak with you privately now," he gasped, wiping sweat from his brow. Judge Reed's robes fluttered as she rose, her stare sharp. "Bring him to chambers," she ordered, sending a ripple of confusion through the gallery. Once inside the judge's wood-paneled sanctum, Carson collapsed into a high-backed chair. "They're setting up innocent people, all of them," he panted, voice cracking. "I discovered dozens of false case files, fabricated evidence, forged signatures. If I testify, they'll kill me." Before Reed could reply, bullets ripped through the doorframe. The shot echoed like thunder across the Persian rug as Carson's body slumped forward, crimson pooling beneath him. Judge Reed screamed, diving behind her desk as the door flew open. Officer Ross burst in, gun drawn, eyes blazing with a perverse triumph. "He knew too much," Ross snarled, stalking toward the fallen lawyer. "Now you know too." His silhouette loomed over Carson's lifeless form, the pistol's weight obvious in his trembling hand. Panic flared, but a silent figure moved faster. The stranger from the gallery, his overcoat swirling, charged Ross, tackling him to the floor in a blur of motion. The gun skidded across the rug. Deputies stormed in, weapons raised, but hesitation froze them. The stranger whirled, snatching up the weapon and training it on Ross's temple. "Don't do it!" Judge Reed cried, voice thin but unwavering. "Don't become like him." In the seconds that followed, breath hung thick in the air. The stranger's finger trembled on the trigger, his knuckles whitened. Then, with a haunted sigh, he lowered the gun. "He's not worth it," he muttered, dropping the weapon at his feet. Deputies seized Ross, cuffing him as he raged and cursed. The room pulsed with shock. Lawyers and staff clustered in the doorway, eyes wide, hands trembling. Carson lay still, a tragic testament to how deep the corruption ran. Judge Reed wiped tears from her cheeks, her voice trembling as she called, "Secure the chamber! Call a recess! Notify the marshal!" Through the open doors, courthouse onlookers whispered frantic questions. The stranger stood in the center of the chaoscote, dusted with the week's newsprint, his chest heaving. Judge Reed climbed from behind her desk, steadying herself with one hand on the oak surface. "Who are you?" she demanded, though her throat felt as raw as the wound in Carson's side. He met her gaze, voice low yet firm. "Someone who refuses to let the innocent die in silence." And in that moment, the walls of Courtroom 5 bore witness to a justice far beyond procedure, one forged in courage, sacrifice, and the raw demand for truth. The aftermath of that single gunshot left Courtroom 5 frozen in disbelief. One moment Carson's crumpled body lay at their feet. The next, Officer Ross stood grimly over the fallen attorney, the smoking barrel of his service pistol still in his hand. "Now you know the truth," he sneered, voice cold and unrepentant. A collective gasp rippled through the spectators as Judge Reed, heart-pounding, fumbled for the panic button built into the edge of her bench. Instantly, high-pitched alarms shattered the stunned silence, echoing down every corridor of the courthouse. Red strobes began to flash, and within seconds, a SWAT-like detail in tactical vests thundered through the doors, weapons raised. But before they could secure the room, the mysterious stranger, his coat swirling like a shadow, slid across the floor with uncanny speed. In one fluid motion, he disarmed Ross, twisting the gun free and pressing it squarely against Ross's temple. "Don't do it," Judge Reed's voice cracked as she scrambled from behind her desk. Her robes flared in her haste, and she reached out with trembling hands. "Don't become like him." For a heartbeat, the stranger's finger hovered over the trigger, his chest heaving with the weight of revenge. Then, as if drawn back by some deeper code of honor, he lowered the weapon. "He's not worth it," he muttered under his breath, and let the pistol clatter harmlessly onto the Persian rug. At that command, deputies lunged forward, their rifles still trained on Ross. He thrashed and screamed, venomous curses flung at the deputies as they wrested him to the ground, clicking cold handcuffs around his wrists. His shouts rang off the paneled walls, but no one met his gaze. The courtroom participants could only watch as the man who once embodied authority was reduced to a defeated figure on the floor. Silence reclaimed the chamber almost as quickly as the alarm had shattered it. The only sound was the soft whine of the security system winding down, and the distant murmur of hurried footsteps. The stranger stood motionless, coat buttoned tight, notebook still tucked under his arm as if nothing had transpired. Judge Reed, eyes wide and voice steady despite her racing pulse, finally broke the hush. "Secure the area. Notify the district attorney and marshal immediately." Her tone was ironclad. This room would never forget what had happened here today, and through it all, the question lingered like a whispered thunderclap. Who was this silent guardian willing to risk everything for justice? As deputies flanked, Ross and medical personnel hurried to tend to Carson's body, every person present understood that the battle unfolding inside these walls was far from over. The real trial would come next, one that would test the very heart of the American justice system. Linking back to the chaos of the courtroom floor, the stranger turned from Ross's incapacitated form and faced Judge Reed. Her robes still brushed with adrenaline, she took a tentative step forward and whispered, "Thank you for saving my life." He gave a single, grave nod, eyes flickering with purpose beneath the courthouse's fluorescent lights. "I have to finish my mission," he replied, voice low and unwavering. Even in the dim aftermath, each word carried weight, an unspoken promise that his work was far from over. Before Reed could press for his identity, his phone buzzed sharply against his side. The stranger's expression darkened, jaw clenching as he glanced at the screen. Without another word, he slipped past her, coat flaring like a shadow, and vanished down the corridor. "Wait!" Reed called, her voice echoing through the wood-paneled hallway. She reached out, fingertips grazing the edge of an empty doorway. But he was already gone. Only the echo of his footsteps and the coppery scent of blood remained. The room lay in stunned silence, punctuated only by the distant wail of approaching sirens. Deputies secured Ross in cuffs, his curses muted by the thick doors. Medical teams hurried in to tend to Carson's body, covering him with a white sheet that stood in stark contrast to the deep red stain on the Persian rug. Reed sank into her judge's chair, hands trembling as she pressed her palms against the polished wood. Questions swirled like debris in a storm. Who was that man? What mission still awaited him? How deep did this conspiracy run, if a single gunshot and an anonymous savior couldn't fully expose it? As backup officers escorted Ross away, the courtroom's occupants looked from the silent judge to the empty doorway. Reporters whispered urgent updates into cameras, capturing every flicker of Reed's expression. From outside the chamber, the persistent hum of a news helicopter patrolling overhead underscored the building's transformation from a temple of law to a battleground for truth. Later, in the hush of her chambers, Reed reviewed the scant notes he'd left behind. A smudged fingerprint on the cradle of her gavel, a single page torn from his notebook. The snippet read simply, "Phase 2, Execute Truth." Beneath it, an address scrawled in neat print that led to a nondescript warehouse on the city's industrial edge. Heart-pounding, she realized this was no isolated act of vigilante justice. It was the opening move in something far larger, an operation that cut through forged indictments, corrupt officials, and the darkest corners of power. Yet with every revelation came the risk of deeper danger. Judge Eleanor Reed rose, straightening her robes as though steeling herself for battle. Outside, the courthouse doors creaked open, and she stepped into the corridor, determination etched on her face. The stranger's mission was now her mission. To chase down the truth he'd risked his life to protect, no matter where it led, even if it meant confronting demons in broad daylight. Building on the echoing footsteps that faded down the corridor, the courtroom now lay empty as a deserted fortress. Every last echo of panic had died away, replaced by a heavy hush that clung to the polished wood paneling. Judge Reed surveyed the scene, the Persian rug spotless of blood, yet its stain remained etched into her mind. She would not leave these walls until she unraveled the mystery of the stranger's identity and his true mission. Hector Ramirez approached, voice low and strained. "We've swept every hallway, every office and stairwell," he reported. No sign of him, like he vanished into thin air. Reed's jaw tightened. She stared at the closed courtroom doors, as if willing them to yield their secrets. "He disabled the cameras on the 3rd floor," she said flatly. "That takes more than brute force. It takes insider access and technical expertise. Only someone with high-level authority could pull that off." "Oh." Ramirez swallowed hard, glancing back at the doorway where deputies still milled. "Should we notify federal authorities?" he asked, concern darkening his eyes. Reed shook her head. "Not yet. If the feds get wind of this prematurely, any chance of tracing him or his contacts will vanish." She pressed her palm against the cold wall, anchoring herself. "We need to track down that warehouse address from his notes. If Phase 2 is to execute truth, then that location holds the next clue." Outside, the courthouse corridors shimmered under fluorescent lights. Reed gathered her composure and signaled Ramirez to follow. They moved with purpose, each step stirring the ghosts of the morning's violence. The hush of the hallways felt brittle, as if any sound might shatter the fragile calm and unleash further chaos. They reached security control, where 2 officers stared at blank monitors. Reed paused at the console. "Whoever was here wiped 10 minutes of footage," she observed, tracing the disabled feeds. "He knew exactly which nodes to target." Ramirez frowned. "That's only possible if he had clearance or an accomplice inside." Reed's eyes narrowed. "We'll need to interview every staff member with access to those cameras, no exceptions." The gravity of her words hung between them as they turned away. In the hush of those corridors, the stakes felt higher than any routine case. The stranger's mission was no longer a one-man vigilante act. It was the opening salvo in a battle against a corruption deeply rooted in the very institutions meant to uphold justice. Judge Reed drew a steadying breath. "We'll uncover him," she vowed, voice firm. "And when we do, we'll make sure the truth wins." As she strode toward her chambers, the courthouse seemed to pulse with anticipation. Somewhere beyond these walls, the next chapter of this high-stakes drama was already unfolding, and the judge was determined not to let it slip through her grasp. Picking up from Judge Reed's determined march down the silent corridors, Elena Morales appeared at her side, phone in hand and camera still rolling. "Your Honor, you need to see this," she said, voice urgent. Reed paused, turning toward the young reporter. Elena's screen displayed a rapid-fire montage, Ross's menacing glare over Carson's body, Carson's desperate plea about the fabricated files, the stranger's precise disarmament, then a single, grainy freeze frame of the stranger's face. Facial recognition flagged him as Tristan Ford, Elena explained, fingers flying across the touchscreen. He was a military intelligence officer, disappeared 2 years ago during a federal corruption probe, officially declared dead. Reed's pulse hammered. Ford, a ghost come back from the grave. If he'd resurfaced here, in her courtroom, it meant the stakes were higher than she'd imagined. Reed motioned them into her chambers, slamming the door behind them. "Go on," she urged. Elena pulled up a dossier, Ford's service record, commendations for covert operations, then the missing person file. He was onto something. Documents showed he'd uncovered an off-the-books unit codenamed C2R, clean to rot. When he refused to comply, they erased him from the books. Elena's voice trembled. He faked his death, went underground. Now he's back to finish what he started. Judge Reed sank into her chair, the weight of the revelation pressing down like the courthouse's shutters. C2R, she mused. That matches the redacted file in Carson's USB. She leaned forward, mind racing. He disabled our cameras, orchestrated that rescue, but why choose this courtroom? Elena offered a theory. This place houses the very evidence C2R tried to bury Carson's files, the forged warrants. Ford needed a platform big enough to expose it all. Across from them, the muted hum of courthouse traffic drifted through the door. Reed stood abruptly, resolve igniting behind her eyes. "We need to secure the evidence before feds swoop in," she declared. "And we need to find Ford's next move." Elena nodded, already prepping to broadcast breaking news. "This is a seismic story, Your Honor. The nation will want answers." Reed paused, hand on the doorknob. "Elena, reach out to my chamber's staff, freeze all records, guard the USB, and contact the marshal's office privately. We can't trust the local desk." Elena's nod was brisk. "Understood." As Reed stepped back into the corridor, her gavel hand trembled only slightly. She knew the next hours would define not only her career, but the very soul of a justice system under attack. Outside, the courthouse facade glowed in midday sun, oblivious to the revolution brewing within. But inside, a judge and a reporter had formed an unbreakable alliance, two truth-seekers, racing against time to unearth a conspiracy that threatened to corrode the rule of law in America. And somewhere, Tristan Ford was already 3 steps ahead. Linking back to the shock of Ford's resurrection, Judge Reed stared at Elena in disbelief. "How can a man declared dead just walk into my courtroom?" she whispered, voice rough with wonder. Elena pulled a small USB drive from her pocket and handed it to Reed. "This is the C2R file, clean to rot. It's a covert unit within the system, tasked with eliminating any legal threat to powerful interests. Ford refused to cooperate, so they cleaned him out." Her tone was urgent as the judge's hands trembled over the laptop keyboard. Reed inserted the drive. The screen flooded with hundreds of dossiers, arrest warrants with doctored signatures, crime scene photos that never happened, transcripts twisted to frame innocent defendants. Each file led back to Officer Ross's precinct and pointed further to prosecutors, clerks, even judges who turned a blind eye. In that dimly lit chamber, the true scale of corruption revealed itself, a web of complicity stretching from street-level arrests to the highest echelons of legal authority. Reed's breath caught as she scrolled past a forged affidavit tying an undercover operation to a victim who'd never existed. She paused on a document stamped Urgent C2R Operational. Beneath it, in Ford's neat handwriting, "Terminate threats, protect the truth." The magnitude of what lay before them crashed over Reed. "They weaponized the justice system," she said, voice trembling with righteous anger. "Ross wasn't acting alone. This goes all the way up." Elena swallowed hard. "Once this goes public, every crooked cop, every silent partner in the district attorney's office will be exposed." Reed closed her eyes for a moment, then reopened them, fierce and unyielding. "We need to secure backups of every file and prepare them for release. If the feds get wind first, they'll bury it deeper." She tapped the drive's icon and initiated a secure transfer to multiple encrypted channels. Elena fed the laptop's live feed to her news outlet's server, ensuring the files would go global within minutes. Outside the chambers, the courthouse corridors felt charged as if the walls themselves braced for the fallout. Reed straightened her robe, voice resolute. "Notify every honest officer, every federal investigator you trust. Tell them to stand by for subpoenas." Elena nodded, already drafting the breaking news script. The judge and the reporter locked eyes. In that tense moment, they were no longer separated by rank or role. They were allies in a battle for truth. Reed's final words hung in the air like a battle cry. "Let them come for us, we'll be ready. Because now, we carry the weight of justice for every life, clean to rot tried to erase." "Oh?" And outside, as reporters gathered under the courthouse steps and police units scrambled, the first tremors of a reckoning began to shake the very foundations of Lincoln County's legal system. The tension sparking in Judge Reed's chambers barely had time to settle when the low growl of an engine shattered the brief calm. She and Elena both turned toward the windows just as a black SUV skidded to a halt on the courthouse plaza. 3 formally dressed agents spilled out sleek suits, discreet earpieces, no badges visible at first glance. One of them strode forward, voice clipped. "Judge Eleanor Reed, we're with the Federal Integrity Task Force. We need to confiscate all evidence related to this morning's incident." Reed's spine straightened. Every instinct honed over decades on the bench screamed that procedure had been violated. She held up the USB drive that still glowed in her hand. "This is part of an ongoing criminal investigation under my court's jurisdiction," she replied, tone firm. "No one may enter the judge's chambers or seize evidence without a valid court order." The lead agent's jaw thinned, uncertainty flickering in his eyes. Behind him, 2 colleagues advanced, surveying the room. The roaring computer fans, the scattered case files on the desk, and the sealed manila envelopes emblazoned C2R evidence. The air crackled with the unspoken clash between federal authority and local judicial sovereignty. Elena stepped beside Reed, camera ready. One agent cleared his throat, pressing a slim folder against his thigh. "Judge Reed, this is a signed warrant from the U.S. Attorney's Office," he said, handing her the document. Reed scanned it-typed pages with the department seal butt, her brow furrowed as she read the fine print. A generic affidavit, no case number, no specific listing of these files. "This warrant is deficient," she declared, pushing it back. "It does not comply with Rule 17 of the Federal Rules of Criminal Procedure. It lacks proper jurisdiction over material held in the judge's chambers. I cannot and will not grant you access without amendment." The lead agent's polite veneer cracked. "Your Honor, national security is at stake. These files could compromise ongoing operations and reveal identities of covert operatives." His colleague nodded, voice urgent. "We have standing orders to secure anything linked to Clean to Rot immediately." Reed's fingers curled around the USB's plastic casing. She met his gaze steadily. "Then take your concerns to the court. File a motion. I will expedite a hearing. But you will not violate my court's integrity by storming in here." A tense silence followed. The agents exchanged uneasy glances, the only sound their polished shoes sliding on marble. Finally, the eldest agent lowered his eyes. "Very well, Your Honor," he said, voice subdued. "We will comply formally." He motioned, and the SUV's engine idled back to life. As the agents retreated, Reed exhaled, the weight of her stand washing over her in relief, tinged with adrenaline. Elena lowered her camera, whispering, "That was incredible." Outside, the courthouse steps teemed with reporters broadcasting every move live, while the black SUV disappeared down the street. Inside, Judge Reed tucked the USBs safely away, the battle lines drawn, the next confrontation looming. The fight for justice had moved into the open, and America was watching. Just as the federal agent's SUV faded from sight, a firm voice echoed down the marble corridor. "Stand back!" Heads whipped around as Tristan Ford emerged from the shadows, his chest-mounted camera blinking with a live stream icon. The gallery blinked in the sudden glare of devices pointed his way, the entire courthouse now his broadcast studio. "I'm Tristan Ford," he announced, voice resonant in the vaulted space. "Once a military intelligence officer, declared dead 2 years ago for refusing to carry out Clean to Rot orders. Now I'm just a citizen demanding justice." His gaze swept over Judge Reed. Reporters, Deputy Sand, finally settled on the 3 federal agents stepping back inside. Instinctively, the agents reached for their holsters. In an instant, dozens of red laser dots snapped into alignment on their chests from snipers, staked out on the courthouse roof. The agents froze mid-draw. Their fingers hovered over triggers, faces blanching under the laser's sheen. Ford's calm command cut through the tension. "You want to challenge me? The world is watching." He strode toward Judge Reed, each step echoing on the polished floor. "I've given you all the evidence you need," he said, pausing a few feet from her bench. "We've unmasked a shadow unit, exposed the corruption, and now it's time to let the public decide." He held out a thumb drive identical to the one Reed had, then nodded to Elena. "Upload everything to the network. They won't be able to deny the truth when it's out there in the open." Elena's fingers flew over her phone, initiating the live upload to news sites and social media as Ford spoke. Graphs, documents, and videos scrolled past the courthouse's grand window-seat piece of damning proof, streaming in real time to thousands of viewers. Outside, news vans honked, satellite trucks roared alive, and the courthouse steps erupted into a clamoring crowd chanting, "Justice! Justice!" Ford turned back to Judge Reed. "You know the stakes. Protect this evidence and these lives. They'll come for you next." His eyes, hard with purpose, locked with hers. Then, without another word, he stepped into the hallway's darkness and vanished as swiftly as he'd appeared. Silence fell again, but it was different this time, charged with possibility. Judge Reed stood motionless, watching the live feed on Elena's phone as the evidence went viral, hashtags trending nationwide. The federal agents, huddled and uncertain, realized they had been outmaneuvered. Deputies closed in on them, quietly ensuring they made no attempt to reclaim the files. Minutes later, Reed raised her gavel to call the court back in session. Her voice rang out, steady and commanding, "Court is now in session. Let the record show every piece of evidence introduced this day shall stand on the public record." Cameras whirred, pens scratched, and in that moment, the balance of power shifted. History had indeed been written within these walls. A ghost soldier reborn, a judge unwavering in her oath, and a citizen's broadcast that forced the truth into the light. And as the nation watched, Lincoln County became the stage for a reckoning that would redefine justice in America. From this story, we learn that each of us holds the power to transform society through our own voices and actions. The message is, don't view yourself as a passive spectator, because only when every individual speaks out against injustice can prejudice lose its footing. Today, every viewer is invited to share their personal perspective. How do you feel about a legal system so manipulated that justice relies on lone heroes? What do you think should be the next step to halt discrimination and corruption? And when do you predict racial bias will truly end? Leave your comment with your prediction, whether it's a specific year, a pivotal event, or a societal catalyst, so that together the community can build a future free from prejudice.